The phone rang at exactly 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, cutting through the peaceful silence of Linda Thompson's small apartment like a blade through paper. She muted her cooking show and reached for the receiver with hands that had grown more fragile with each passing year. "Hello, Linda?" Jessica's voice was crisp, businesslike, without an ounce of warmth. No pleasantries, no asking how she was doing, just her name spoken like it left a bitter taste. "Oh, hello, dear," Linda replied, sitting straighter in her worn armchair. "How are you? How's Michael?" Jessica didn't answer. She never did. Instead, she launched into what Linda now recognized as a carefully orchestrated humiliation. "I'm calling about Thanksgiving," Jessica said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "If you want to participate this year, you can come early to help with the dishes. The cooking and serving will be handled by people who actually know what they're doing." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. She felt her chest tighten, that familiar ache spreading through her ribs. People who actually know what they're doing. As if 43 years of cooking for her late husband, Robert, and son Michael meant nothing. As if the countless meals she'd prepared with love and care were just amateur attempts. "I see," Linda managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Good. Come at noon sharp. We'll be eating at 4, so you'll have plenty to clean up afterward." There was a pause, and Linda could hear Jessica's satisfaction through the phone. "Oh, and Linda, don't bring any of your contributions. We have everything covered." The line went dead. Jessica had hung up without saying goodbye, leaving Linda sitting there with the phone pressed against her ear, listening to the dial tone like it might somehow take back the words she'd just heard. Linda set the phone down with trembling hands and stared at the blank television screen. Her reflection looked back at her, a 64-year-old woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. When had she become so invisible, so disposable? The memories came flooding back as they always did when Jessica reminded her of her place in their perfect little world. It hadn't always been this way. When Michael was young, just the two of them after Robert died, they'd been a team. He'd helped her set the table while she cooked their simple meals, and they'd talk about his day at school, his dreams, his fears. But then came Jessica. Linda remembered the first time Michael brought her home. She was 27, 3 years younger than Michael, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that cost more than Linda's monthly grocery budget. She'd walked through Linda's small apartment like she was inspecting a crime scene, her nose slightly wrinkled as she took in the secondhand furniture and faded wallpaper. "It's so quaint," she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. "Very authentic vintage." Michael had laughed, thinking it was a compliment. Linda had known better. The changes started small. Michael began declining her dinner invitations because Jessica preferred restaurants. He stopped calling as often because Jessica thought he was too dependent on his mother. When they got engaged, Linda wasn't asked to help plan the wedding. Jessica's mother handled everything. She explained, because it was less complicated that way. Linda should have spoken up then. She should have fought for her place in her son's life, but she didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, the one who caused problems in their marriage. So she stepped back, made herself smaller, hoped that her quiet compliance would earn her some affection, some respect. It never did. Walking to her small kitchen, Linda put the kettle on for tea, a ritual that had comforted her through countless difficult moments over the years. As she waited for the water to boil, she caught sight of her reflection in the window above the sink. When had she started looking so defeated? When had her shoulders begun to curve inward as if she were trying to make herself invisible? The apartment around her told the story of her diminished life. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living area that served as both dining room and entertainment center. The furniture was clean but worn, collected over decades from thrift stores and garage sales. She'd been living here for 8 years, ever since she could no longer afford the small house where Michael grew up. As the kettle whistled, Linda made a decision that surprised even her. She picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. "Mom." He sounded surprised. She rarely called him directly. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just wanted to let you know that I won't be coming to Thanksgiving this year." "What, why not?" "I think it would be better if you just had it with Jessica's family. No need to complicate things." For the first time in years, Linda had said no to them. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. "Enjoy your Thanksgiving, Michael," she said quietly, and hung up before he could respond. The letter arrived the next morning in an expensive cream envelope with her name written in elegant script. Linda almost threw it away, assuming it was another charity solicitation, but something about the weight of the paper made her pause. The return address read, "Davidson and Associates, Attorneys at Law, from a firm in Hartford, Connecticut." Her hands shook as she opened it. Nobody sends good news through lawyers, she thought, already imagining some final debt of Robert's coming back to haunt her. "Dear Mrs. Linda Catherine Thompson," it began, using her full name in a way that made her sit up straighter. Nobody had called her Catherine in decades. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Victoria Sterling Ashford, who died peacefully at her estate on October 15th. As per her last will and testament, you have been named as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange the transfer of assets." Linda read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. Victoria Sterling Ashford. The name transported her back 45 years to a time when she was a different person entirely. Catherine Whitmore. That had been her name then, before she became Linda Thompson, before she chose love over luxury and never looked back. She was 19, fresh out of finishing school and heir to the Whitmore textile fortune. Her family owned mills throughout New England, and their name opened doors that others could only dream of walking through. She'd been rebellious even then, while her friends were making suitable matches with men from families like theirs. She'd fallen head over heels for Robert Thompson, a mechanic who worked at the garage where she'd taken her car for repairs. He was honest and kind and made her laugh in ways that her proper suitors never had. He saw her as Catherine, not as a Whitmore fortune with legs. When she told her parents she intended to marry him, they were horrified. Her father threatened to disown her. Her mother took to her bed with nervous exhaustion. The family lawyer explained in terms she was too young and too in love to fully appreciate exactly what she would be giving up. The Whitmore Trust was structured in a way that required family approval for inheritance. If she married outside their social circle, she would forfeit her claim to the family wealth, not just her inheritance, but her entire connection to the family legacy. She was 19 and believed that love conquered all. She chose Robert. The day after their small wedding ceremony, attended only by Robert's family and a few friends, she received a formal letter from the same law firm that had just contacted her 45 years later. She was no longer a Whitmore. Her trust fund was dissolved, her inheritance revoked. She was free to live her new life, but she would do it without the safety net she'd known since birth. She never regretted it. Robert and she had 30 wonderful years together before the cancer took him. They struggled financially. His mechanic's salary and later his small pension weren't much, but they were happy. They raised Michael in a home filled with love, even if it lacked the material luxuries she'd grown up with. Victoria had been her closest friend during their finishing school years. They'd lost touch after Catherine's marriage, but apparently Victoria had never forgotten her. Linda called the law firm immediately. The receptionist transferred her to Mr. Davidson himself, who spoke with the kind of refined accent she remembered from her childhood. "Mrs. Thompson," he said warmly. "Or should I say Miss Whitmore Victoria spoke of you often?" "She did." Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper. Oh, yes, she followed your life with great interest. When she learned you had married for love and left the family, she said you were the bravest woman she'd ever known. The bequest was substantial, a villa in Switzerland, along with 40% ownership in Victoria's investment company and a trust fund to maintain the property. But there was a condition: Linda would need to live at the villa for at least 2 years to claim full ownership. Victoria felt that someone who'd once given up everything for love deserved to spend her later years in comfort. Mr. Davidson explained. She was quite specific about the residency requirement. She wanted to ensure you'd truly embrace this new chapter. When Linda hung up the phone 20 minutes later, she had detailed information about a property she owned in a country she'd never visited, and a life-changing decision to make. That evening, Linda sat in her small kitchen with Victoria's personal letter, which Mr. Davidson had overnighted to her. The envelope was sealed with wax, so very like Victoria to maintain such old-fashioned elegance even in death. My dearest Catherine, it began in Victoria's familiar handwriting, though shakier now with age. If you are reading this, then you have finally come home to yourself. I never forgot the girl who chose love over money, who walked away from everything she'd known because her heart told her to. You were the bravest of all of us, even if life hasn't always rewarded that bravery as it should have. I followed your story through the years. Yes, I had someone keeping track of you. Don't look so surprised. I knew about your happy marriage, your son, your husband's death. I knew when you had to sell your house, when you moved to that tiny apartment. Linda had to stop reading to wipe her eyes. She'd always wondered how she'd managed during the hardest times, how certain bills had mysteriously been paid, how unexpected checks had arrived just when she needed them most. I hope you'll forgive an old friend's interference, the letter continued. Those anonymous payments over the years weren't from some charitable organization. They were from me. I couldn't bear to see you struggle when I had so much. You gave up a fortune for love, and I wanted to ensure that choice didn't destroy you. Linda's hands trembled as she absorbed this revelation. Victoria had been her guardian angel for decades, watching over her from afar, ensuring she survived the consequences of choosing love over wealth. I never married, could never find a man worth giving up my independence for, as you so memorably put it when we were 18. But I envied you, Catherine. I truly did. You found something worth sacrificing everything for. That's rarer than rubies. The villa has been waiting for you. I've kept it perfect because I always hoped that someday you would need a place where you could remember who you really are. Not Linda the obligation, not Linda the disappointment, but Catherine the woman who was brave enough to choose her own path. The investment company shares will provide you with a comfortable income, but the 2-year residency requirement isn't arbitrary. You need time to remember yourself, to shed the small life you've been living, and step into the magnificent one you deserve. Mrs. Mama Mueller knows all about managing the household and will teach you everything you need to know. Hans will drive you wherever you need to go. You are 64 years old, my dear friend. You have at least 20 good years ahead of you. Don't waste them being small to make other people comfortable. Be magnificent instead. All my love, Victoria P. S. I've left you my camera collection. Remember how you loved photography at school? Perhaps it's time to take it up again. Linda sat at her small table as the sun set outside her window, crying harder than she had since Robert died. But these weren't tears of grief or self-pity. They were tears of recognition, of coming home to herself after decades of being lost. She thought about Michael and Jessica, probably discussing her strange behavior over dinner, wondering what had gotten into sensible old Linda. They had no idea that their cruelty had been the key that unlocked a door she'd closed 45 years ago, for the first time since Robert's death. Linda fell asleep that night, excited about what tomorrow might bring. She had a decision to make, one that would change everything. But deep in her chest, beneath the hurt and humiliation of Jessica's phone call, something small and fierce was stirring. Something that had been sleeping for far too long was finally starting to wake up. The next morning, Linda called Mr. Davidson back. "I'd like to see the villa as soon as possible," she told him. "Can you arrange for me to fly there next week?" "Of course," he replied. "Victoria would be delighted." The plane touched down in Geneva on a crisp Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Jessica's humiliating phone call. Linda pressed her face to the small window, watching the Swiss Alps emerge from the clouds like something from a fairy tale. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear of flying, which she'd managed better than expected, but from the enormity of what she was about to discover. Mr. Davidson had arranged everything. A driver waited for her at the airport, holding a sign with her name, her real name, Catherine Whitmore, written in careful script. He was a middle-aged Swiss man named Hans, who spoke perfect English with a slight accent that made everything sound more elegant. "Welcome to Switzerland, Miss Whitmore," he said, taking her single worn suitcase. "Mrs. Ashford spoke of you many times. She was very eager for this day to come." As they drove through the countryside, Hans told her about Victoria's final years. She'd lived quietly at the villa, he said, tending her gardens and reading voraciously. She'd maintained friendships with people all over the world through her extensive correspondence. "She received a letter about 2 months ago," Hans said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "After she read it, she called the lawyers immediately to make sure everything was in order for you." Linda's stomach tightened. "A letter from where?" "From someone who knew your family. I believe she had seen you at the local market and recognized you from old photographs. She wrote to Mrs. Ashford about your circumstances." The thought of being pitied made Linda's cheeks burn, but Hans continued gently, "Mrs. Ashford was not pitying you. She was angry, very angry. She said it was wrong that someone who had sacrificed so much for love should spend her golden years struggling." They turned through a set of iron gates, and Linda's breath caught in her throat. Villa Sterling rose before them like something from a dream. 3 stories of honey-colored stone with ivy climbing the walls and tall windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Gardens stretched in every direction, filled with late-blooming roses and perfectly manicured hedges. Beyond the gardens, Lake Geneva sparkled like scattered diamonds. "My God," Linda whispered. "Beautiful, yes," Hans smiled. "Mrs. Ashford always said it was waiting for the right person to truly appreciate it." He parked in front of the main entrance where an older woman in a crisp gray dress waited on the steps. Hans introduced her as Mrs. Muller, the housekeeper who had cared for the villa for the past 15 years. "Miss Whitmore," she said with a slight curtsy that made Linda feel simultaneously ridiculous and regal. "Welcome home." Home. The word echoed in Linda's chest as Mrs. Muller led her through the front door. The interior took her breath away. High ceilings with ornate molding, walls covered in silk wallpaper, antique furniture that belonged in museums. Every room they passed through was more beautiful than the last, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a music room with a grand piano, a dining room that could seat 20 people in comfort. Mrs. Ashford left specific instructions that nothing was to be changed, Mrs. Vati, Mueller said as they climbed the wide staircase to the second floor. "She said you would know what to do with everything." But as they toured the villa, Mr. Davidson's assistant, who had flown in to handle the legal aspects, presented Linda with a thick folder of documents. "The inheritance comes with certain complexities," he explained. "There are property taxes, maintenance costs, and the investment company shares require active management. Mrs. Ashford's lawyer in Zurich will need to meet with you this week to explain the residency requirements and financial obligations." Linda felt a moment of panic. She'd lived on a tight budget for so long that the idea of managing significant wealth seemed overwhelming. But then she remembered Victoria's words about being magnificent instead of small. "I'll learn," she said simply. Whatever it takes. The assistant smiled. Mrs. Ashford said you would say exactly that. Linda's first week at Villa Sterling was a whirlwind of legal meetings, financial consultations, and cultural adjustments that left her head spinning. The inheritance, while generous, came with complications Victoria's letter hadn't fully prepared her for. The Swiss tax implications alone were staggering. Linda found herself sitting across from stern-faced officials in Zurich, struggling to understand regulations about foreign inheritance, residency requirements, and investment obligations. Her limited German and French made every interaction feel like navigating a maze blindfolded. The residency requirement is quite specific, explained Mr. Brunner, Victoria's Swiss attorney. You must maintain primary residence at the villa for 24 consecutive months to claim full ownership. Any absence of more than 30 days resets the clock. More challenging was learning to manage the investment company's shares. Victoria's portfolio included textile manufacturing, real estate, and emerging technology companies. Linda, who had balanced her checkbook with careful precision for decades, now found herself responsible for decisions affecting hundreds of employees and millions in assets. Mrs. Ashford insisted you take an active role, explained the company's managing director during their first meeting. She believed your life experience would bring valuable perspective to our operations. Linda felt like an imposter sitting in the Geneva boardroom, surrounded by executives in expensive suits discussing market trends and quarterly projections. But gradually, she began to recognize something Victoria had seen. Her years of careful budgeting, of making every dollar count, had given her an understanding of value that pure wealth couldn't teach. The cultural adjustment proved equally challenging. Swiss social customs were intricate and unforgiving. Linda made embarrassing mistakes showing up inappropriately dressed for village events, misunderstanding social hierarchies, struggling with the formal way people addressed each other. Mrs. Muller became her patient guide. In Switzerland, we value precision and reserve, she explained after Linda's enthusiastic American friendliness had clearly made several villagers uncomfortable. Relationships develop slowly here, but once formed, they last for generations. The language barrier created daily frustrations. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or visiting the bank required careful preparation and often involved awkward miscommunications. Linda found herself exhausted by the mental effort required for basic interactions. But the most significant challenge came on a Thursday morning when a black sedan pulled up to the villa's entrance. Two men in dark suits emerged, followed by a sharp-faced woman carrying an expensive briefcase. Miss Whitmore. The woman's English was crisp and accented. I am Frau Kellner, representing the Whitmore Family Trust in America. We need to discuss your recent inheritance. Linda's blood ran cold. She'd assumed her family had forgotten her existence decades ago. There has been a misunderstanding. Frau Kellner continued as they sat in the villa's formal salon. The Whitmore Trust believes Mrs. Ashford's bequest may have been obtained under false pretenses. Your family never formally recognized your abandonment of the Whitmore name. The legal documents Frau Kellner presented were dense and threatening. The Whitmore family, apparently led by Linda's nephew, the son of her brother, who had died 5 years earlier, was challenging Victoria's will. They claimed Linda had manipulated Victoria using false identity and hidden family connections. This is absurd, Linda said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. Victoria knew exactly who I was. We corresponded for years before her death. Nevertheless, Frau Kellner replied coldly, the Swiss courts will need to resolve this matter. Until they do, all assets related to Mrs. Ashford's bequest are frozen. Linda felt the walls of her new life closing in around her. She'd given up her apartment in America, burned bridges with Michael and Jessica, and committed to 2 years in Switzerland. Now everything hung in the balance of a legal system she barely understood. challenged by family members who had written her off decades ago, but apparently couldn't tolerate her good fortune. But as she looked around the beautiful salon where Victoria had spent her final years, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 19 years old, the fierce determination to fight for what was rightfully hers. "Then we fight," she told Frau Kellner. "Victoria left me this inheritance for a reason, and I won't let anyone take it away." While Linda battled legal challenges in Switzerland, her social media posts were creating a storm back home. She'd started sharing photos almost without thinking her morning coffee on the villa's terrace, the view of Lake Geneva from her bedroom window, the fresh flowers Mrs. Muller arranged each day. The responses revealed more about her old life than she'd ever realized. Her first post, a simple sunset over the lake, received 43 comments within 2 hours. Old friends from her neighborhood, distant relatives, even some of Michael's acquaintances were weighing in with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Linda, this is absolutely gorgeous. Where are you staying? This looks like Switzerland. How can you afford to travel there? Are you sure you're not being scammed? These sudden lifestyle changes worry me." But it was the private messages that truly revealed how her transformation was being received. Several came from old friends expressing genuine happiness, but others carried an undertone of resentment and disbelief. "Linda, I'm so confused. Last month you were clipping coupons, and now you're posting from what looks like a luxury resort. What's really going on? It must be nice to suddenly have money to spend on yourself. Some of us are still struggling with bills. I hope you haven't gotten involved with some online romance scam. These sudden changes are usually too good to be true." The most cutting message came from her former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "People are talking. Linda, your son looks embarrassed every time someone mentions your posts. Don't you think you owe your family an explanation?" Linda stared at these messages, feeling a familiar urge to explain, to apologize, to make herself smaller so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable with her good fortune. But then she remembered Victoria's words about choosing magnificence over mediocrity. Instead of responding to the critical messages, she posted another photo herself in the villa's library, wearing one of Victoria's elegant sweaters, surrounded by leather-bound books with Lake Geneva visible through the tall windows behind her. She looked confident, sophisticated, completely at ease in her surroundings. The caption read simply, "Reading has always been my escape. Now it's become my education." The response was immediate and intense. Within an hour, the post had received over 60 comments, but the tone had shifted from curiosity to something approaching hostility. "Who are you trying to fool? Linda, we all know you can barely afford your rent." "This is getting ridiculous. Just tell people where the money is coming from. Your son called me asking if I knew what was wrong with you. He's really worried." But the comment that cut deepest came from someone she didn't immediately recognize. "My mother worked for the Whitmore family years ago. She said old Catherine was disowned for marrying beneath her station. Interesting to see her crawling back to family money now that her husband's dead." Linda's hands shook as she read it. Someone had connected her current situation to her past, and now the speculation would only intensify. She could imagine the conversations happening in her old neighborhood, the theories being passed from person to person about how poor Linda Thompson had suddenly acquired wealth. Her phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and her stomach tightened. She'd been dreading this call, knowing it would come eventually. "Mom," he said when she answered, his voice carrying that tone of forced patience she knew so well. "We need to talk." "Hello, Michael. How are you?" "I'm confused. Mom, really confused. Jessica's been showing me your Facebook posts, and we can't figure out what's going on." Linda took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. "I mean, where are you getting the money for all this? The clothes, the travel, the fancy accommodations. Last month you were living in that tiny apartment, shopping with coupons, and now you're posting pictures that look like you're living in some luxury resort." I'm living comfortably, Linda said, choosing her words carefully. Mom, comfortable doesn't cover it. You look like you've won the lottery. In the background, Linda could hear Jessica's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying was clearly agitating Michael further. Mom, Michael continued, Jessica thinks you might be getting scammed. You know, those online romance things where older people get taken advantage of. Have you been talking to someone online? The implication hit Linda like a slap. In their minds, the only way poor, naive Linda could suddenly be living well was if she was being deceived by criminals. The conversation that followed would change everything between them. Michael, Linda said, her voice colder than she'd ever heard it, I am not being scammed. I am not delusional, and I am not your concern. Of course you're my concern. You're my mother. We're worried about you. You weren't worried about me when you let your wife tell me I could wash dishes at Thanksgiving. You weren't concerned when I was living alone in that apartment, struggling to make ends meet. Your concern seems very selective. There was a long silence. In the background, Linda could hear Jessica saying something urgent, but Michael shushed her. Mom, that's not fair. We've always cared about you. Have you? Linda asked quietly. Because caring usually involves actually asking someone how they are, not just assuming they're being foolish when their circumstances improve. So how are your circumstances improving? Can you at least tell me that? Linda looked around her beautiful bedroom at Villa Sterling, at the life Victoria had given her, at the photographs she'd taken that were scattered across the writing desk. She thought about the legal battles she was fighting, about the Swiss attorneys working to protect her inheritance, about the woman she was rediscovering in the mirror each morning. I can tell you that I'm happier than I've been in years, she said. I can tell you that I'm finally living the life I was meant to live, and I can tell you that I'm not asking you for anything, not your approval, not your understanding, and certainly not your permission. Mom, you're scaring us. You're... Good, Linda said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Maybe it's time you were a little worried about losing me instead of assuming I'll always be there to accept whatever scraps of attention you decide to throw my way. She could hear Jessica in the background, her voice rising to an almost shrill pitch. Finally, Michael put her on speaker. Linda, Jessica's voice was tight with barely controlled hysteria. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it needs to stop. Michael hasn't slept properly in days. You can't just disappear and post these ridiculous pictures without explaining yourself. I haven't disappeared, Jessica. I've simply moved on. Moved on to what some fantasy life you can't afford. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for Michael? People are asking questions he can't answer. Linda felt years of suppressed anger rising in her chest. I'm embarrassing to you. The woman who told me I could wash dishes if I wanted to participate in family dinner. I was trying to include you. You were trying to humiliate me, and you succeeded. But congratulations. Jessica, your cruelty was exactly the push I needed to remember who I really am. Who you really are. Jessica's voice dripped with disdain. You're a 64-year-old widow living on Social Security. This whole charade is pathetic. The words hung in the air like poison. Linda closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every assumption, every dismissal, every moment when she'd been treated as less than human by this woman who had never bothered to truly know her. Jessica, Linda said, her voice deadly quiet. You have no idea who I am. You never did. You saw what you wanted to see, a poor old woman you could look down on to make yourself feel superior. But I am Catherine Whitmore, heir to a fortune you couldn't imagine in your wildest dreams. I chose to give it up for love 45 years ago, and I've never regretted that decision. The silence on the other end was deafening. What are you talking about? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. I'm talking about the fact that your mother was born into one of the wealthiest families in New England. I'm talking about the trust fund I walked away from to marry your father. I'm talking about the friend who never forgot me and left me an inheritance that will support me for the rest of my life. That's impossible, Jessica said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. Have you looked up the address where I'm staying, Jessica? Have you researched Villa Sterling? Because if you had, you'd know that I'm sitting in a property worth more than your house and Michael's combined. Linda could hear frantic typing in the background, then Jessica's sharp intake of breath. Michael, Linda continued, I gave you a choice when you were born to be raised in love or in privilege. I chose love, and I raised you to be a kind, thoughtful man. But somehow, you've forgotten those lessons. Mom, I'm going to give you another choice now, Linda said, her voice steady and final. You can accept that I'm living my life on my terms, or you can continue to side with a woman who treats your mother like hired help. But Michael, if you ever question my mental competence again, if you ever suggest I'm being scammed again, I will cut you out of my life completely. She hung up before either of them could respond, in the silence that followed her ultimatum to Michael. Linda felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. She'd just burned a bridge she'd spent decades trying to cross. But as she looked out at Lake Geneva, glowing silver in the moonlight, she realized she didn't want to cross that bridge anymore. Her phone started ringing immediately, Michael calling back, probably in shock at her ultimatum. Linda turned it off and walked out onto her balcony, breathing in the crisp Swiss air. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Muller knocked on her door with an expression Linda had never seen before, part confusion, part concern. Madame, she said carefully, there is a young woman at the gate. She says she is your son's wife and that she has flown from America to see you. Linda's stomach dropped. Jessica is here in Switzerland. She arrived in a taxi from Geneva. She seems quite agitated. Through her bedroom window, Linda could see Jessica pacing by the villa's front gate, her usual perfect composure clearly shattered. She was dressed inappropriately for the Swiss morning chill designer jeans and a light sweater that screamed expensive but offered little warmth. Shall I tell her you're not receiving visitors, Mrs. Muller asked diplomatically. Linda considered it. Part of her wanted to hide behind the villa's walls and let Jessica freeze at the gate. But curiosity won out. After 48 hours of wondering how Michael and Jessica had reacted to her revelation, she needed to see for herself. No, Linda said finally. Let her in, but stay close, please. Mrs. Mueller nodded and disappeared downstairs. A few minutes later, Linda heard voices in the foyer, Jessica's shrill American accent clashing with Mrs. Mueller's measured Swiss formality. When Linda descended the grand staircase, she found Jessica standing in the salon, turning in slow circles as she took in the opulent surroundings. The villa's morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating silk wallpaper and priceless antiques in a way that made the room look like something from a European palace. "My God," Jessica whispered, her face pale. "It's real. All of it's real." "Hello, Jessica," Linda said calmly. "This is unexpected." Jessica spun around, her eyes wide and desperate. Catherine, I need to understand what's happening. Michael is falling apart. He won't eat, won't sleep. He keeps saying he doesn't know who his mother is anymore. Perhaps that's because he never bothered to find out. Jessica's composure cracked completely. "You have to understand. I never knew. When I made that comment about Thanksgiving, about the dishes, I thought you were just... You thought I was just a poor old woman you could push around," Linda finished. "You were right. I was. But I'm not anymore." "How long have you known?" Jessica asked suddenly. "About the inheritance." "I found out the day after your phone call." Jessica's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, calculation, and finally, something like panic. But that means when I wrote to Mrs. Ashford. Linda's blood turned to ice. What did you say? I wrote to Mrs. Ashford, Jessica repeated, the words tumbling out in a rush. 3 months ago, I found old society pages online with pictures of you from the 1980s. I recognized you and did some research. When I found out about your family's wealth and that Victoria Sterling Ashford was still alive, I thought... You thought what? Exactly. Jessica's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her emails. I thought if I told her about your circumstances, maybe she'd help with money. For Michael's sake. We have debts, the house, credit cards, my car payments. You thought you could use my poverty to manipulate an old woman into giving you money, Linda said, her voice dangerously quiet. Jessica's face flushed red. It wasn't like that. I genuinely thought she might want to help someone from her past. I mentioned how hard things had been for you since Robert died, how you were struggling in that tiny apartment. Show me the email. With trembling fingers, Jessica pulled up the message she'd sent to Victoria 3 months earlier. Linda read it with growing horror and rage. Dear Mrs. Ashford, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing regarding Catherine Whitmore, whom I believe you may remember from your youth. She now goes by Linda Thompson and is the mother of my husband, Michael. I felt compelled to reach out because Catherine's circumstances have become quite dire. Since her husband's death 8 years ago, she has been living in a small apartment, struggling financially. She clips coupons, shops at thrift stores, and often goes without proper meals to make ends meet. As her daughter-in-law, I've tried to help, but our own financial situation is stretched thin. I wondered if you might remember your old friend fondly enough to offer some assistance. Even a small monthly stipend would make an enormous difference in her quality of life. She has no idea I'm writing this. She's far too proud to ask for help, but I thought perhaps an old friend might want to know about her situation. Respectfully yours, Jessica Thompson. Linda's hands shook with rage as she finished reading. You tried to use my suffering to get money from Victoria. I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself. You saw an opportunity to get money from a wealthy old woman, and you took it. But Jessica, you made one crucial mistake. What? You assumed Victoria would give the money to you. Linda's smile was cold and satisfied. Instead, she left everything to me and made sure I knew exactly why. Jessica's face went white. What do you mean? Linda walked to the writing desk and pulled out Victoria's letter, the one that had changed everything. She handed it to Jessica, watching as the younger woman's face crumbled with each paragraph. She knew, Jessica whispered. She knew exactly what I was doing. Victoria was 93 years old, not 93 years naive, Linda said. She'd spent decades dealing with people who wanted her money. Did you really think she wouldn't see through your manipulation? Jessica sank into one of the salon's antique chairs, the letter falling from her hands. Michael doesn't know about the email. He thinks you just inherited randomly. And you're going to tell him the truth. I can't. He'll never forgive me. Linda felt no pity for the woman who had spent years treating her like dirt. That's not my problem. Jessica, that's yours. The confrontation with Jessica marked a turning point Linda hadn't expected. As her daughter-in-law sat in the villa's elegant salon, crying tears that seemed more about being caught than being genuinely remorseful, Linda felt the last vestiges of her old, accommodating self disappear. What happens now? Jessica asked through her tears. Are you going to tell Michael about the email? Linda considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to expose Jessica's manipulation immediately, to show Michael exactly what kind of person he'd married. But she realized that would be fighting Jessica's battle for her. That's between you and your husband, Linda said finally. I'm done managing other people's relationships. Please, Linda Catherine, whatever you want me to call you, I made a mistake. I was desperate. The house payments, my credit cards, Michael's business isn't doing as well as he pretends. Stop. Linda's voice cut through Jessica's excuses like a blade. I don't want to hear about your financial problems. I spent years listening to you complain about money while you treated me like a servant. Your struggles are not my responsibility. Jessica's tears turned to anger. So, that's it. You get rich and forget about your family. My family. Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jessica, you made it very clear that I was not part of your family. I was the obligation you tolerated, the burden you endured. Well, congratulations, you're free of that burden now. What about Michael? He's your son. Michael is a grown man who chose to let his wife humiliate his mother for years. If he wants a relationship with me, he can apologize and change his behavior. But I'm not going to beg for his attention anymore. Jessica stood up abruptly. Her designer purse clutched to her chest like armor. This isn't over. Michael loves you. He'll come around. Perhaps, but not because you've manipulated him into it. And Jessica... Linda's voice stopped her at the salon door. If you ever contact Victoria's estate again, if you ever try to claim any connection to my inheritance, I will have you prosecuted for fraud. The Swiss take financial crimes very seriously. After Jessica left, Linda felt both exhausted and exhilarated. For the first time in her adult life, she had drawn clear, unmovable boundaries. She had refused to explain herself, refused to make excuses for others, refused to shrink herself to make someone else comfortable. Mrs. Muller appeared with afternoon tea, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes warm with approval. The young woman seemed upset when she left. Mrs. Botts Muller observed diplomatically. I imagine she was. She just learned that actions have consequences, apparently, for the first time in her life. Mrs. Ashford dealt with similar situations, Mrs. Muller said as she poured tea into delicate china cups. People who appeared when they heard about money, relatives who suddenly remembered family ties. She always said that wealth reveals people's true nature. What did she do about them? She was very clear about her boundaries. She helped people who had helped themselves, who had shown character and integrity, but she never rewarded manipulation or greed. Mrs. Muller paused. She would be very proud of how you handled that conversation. That evening, Linda made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She changed her Facebook privacy settings so that only confirmed friends could see her posts, and she blocked several people who had been leaving intrusive comments. Then she posted a new photo herself on the villa's terrace at sunset, wearing one of Victoria's elegant cardigans, with Lake Geneva stretching endlessly behind her. The caption read, "Learning to say no has been the most liberating lesson of my life. Some bridges are meant to be burned." Her phone started ringing almost immediately, Michael's number appearing on the screen. But for the first time in years, Linda didn't feel compelled to answer. She turned off the phone and spent the evening reading in the library, surrounded by Victoria's books and the peaceful silence of her new life. She had drawn her boundaries. Now she would see who respected them enough to deserve a place in her transformed world. 3 months passed without contact from Michael or Jessica, and Linda discovered something remarkable. She didn't miss the drama. The peaceful rhythm of her Swiss Life morning coffee on the terrace, afternoon photography sessions around the lake, evening conversations with Mrs. Muller and Hans, was more fulfilling than years of walking on eggshells around her son's family. But the silence wouldn't last forever. Michael Thompson stood in his kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at his laptop screen with bloodshot eyes. For the past week, he'd been researching everything he could find about the Whitmore family, about Villa Sterling, about the woman he'd called Mom for 34 years without really knowing her at all. The documents spread across his kitchen table told an incredible story. Society pages from the 1970s showed a radiant young woman named Catherine Whitmore at charity galas and debutante balls. Financial records revealed a textile empire worth hundreds of millions. And obituaries from recent years detailed the slow extinction of one of New England's most prominent families. But it was a 1980 wedding announcement that broke his heart. Miss Catherine Whitmore and Mr. Robert Thompson were married Saturday in a small ceremony attended by the groom's family. Miss Whitmore, daughter of industrialist Harrison Whitmore, will make her home with her husband in Connecticut. No mention of the bride's family attending, no lavish celebration, just a 19-year-old girl walking away from everything she'd ever known to marry a mechanic she loved. "You've been up all night again," Jessica said from the doorway, her voice carefully controlled. She'd been walking on eggshells around him since returning from Switzerland, refusing to discuss what had happened at the villa beyond, saying it was complicated. "Do you know what I found?" Michael asked without looking up. "I found the trust fund documents from when Catherine was disinherited. The Whitmore Trust was worth $43 million in 1980. $43 million. Jessica. She gave up $43 million to marry Dad." Jessica said nothing, but Michael could see her reflection in the laptop screen, her face pale and strained. "And here's the really amazing part," Michael continued, his voice rising. "She never told me, never once mentioned that she'd sacrificed a fortune for our family. I grew up thinking we were just middle class, that Dad's mechanic salary was normal, that Mom's careful budgeting was just being responsible. Michael. No, let me finish." He turned to face his wife, and Jessica took a step back at the intensity in his eyes. "She lived in that tiny apartment for 8 years. 8 years, Jessica. She shopped with coupons and wore clothes from thrift stores and let you treat her like hired help. And she never once said, 'Actually, I used to be richer than all of you combined.' What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me why you wrote to Victoria Ashford." The color drained completely from Jessica's face. "What are you talking about?" Michael pulled out his phone and showed her the email he'd finally found buried in her sent folder. "I want you to tell me why my wife wrote to an elderly woman, pretending to be concerned about my mother's welfare, when what you were really doing was trying to get money." Jessica's composure cracked. "I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself. You saw an opportunity to manipulate an old woman into giving us money, and you took it. But it backfired, didn't it? Instead of sending us a check, Victoria left everything to Mom." "Michael, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The house payments, my credit cards, your business. My business is fine. Your spending is the problem. Your need to compete with every other wife in the neighborhood, your designer clothes, your luxury car payments, that's what's killing us financially, not my work." Jessica's mask finally fell away completely. "I can't live like your mother did. I can't clip coupons and shop at thrift stores and pretend to be grateful for scraps. I grew up poor, Michael. I know what that looks like, and I won't go back." "So you decided to make my mother feel poor instead, to treat her like she was beneath you when she'd actually given up more than you could ever imagine. She chose to give it up. She chose your father over her family's money. That was her decision." "Yes, it was. And it was the most selfless, loving decision anyone could make. She chose to raise me with love instead of privilege. And instead of being grateful for that sacrifice, I let you humiliate her for years." Michael closed the laptop and gathered the papers scattered across the table. "I'm going to Switzerland. Jessica, I'm going to apologize to my mother and try to repair the damage we've done. And what about us? What about our marriage?" Michael looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in years. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the calculation, the way she was already working out how his mother's wealth might benefit them. He saw a woman who had manipulated an elderly stranger for money and felt no genuine remorse for treating his mother cruelly. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know if there's an us anymore. I don't like who I am when I'm with you." Jessica, and I finally understand why Mom never felt comfortable around you. You can't just abandon our marriage because your mother got rich. I'm not abandoning our marriage because Mom got rich. I'm questioning our marriage because you tried to exploit an elderly woman, and because you've spent years making my mother feel unwelcome in her own son's life." Michael walked toward the door, then turned back. "And Jessica, stop calling her Mom. Her name is Catherine Whitmore, and she's worth more than you'll ever understand." After Michael left for Switzerland, Jessica found herself alone in their house for the first time in months. The silence was deafening, filled with the weight of secrets she could no longer carry and the growing certainty that her carefully constructed life was falling apart. She poured herself a glass of wine, expensive wine, because even in crisis, Jessica maintained her standards and sat at her computer. The email to Victoria Ashford was still open on the screen, a monument to her desperation and poor judgment. But that wasn't the only secret she'd been keeping. With shaking hands, Jessica opened another email account, one Michael didn't know about. The correspondence with Swiss attorneys that she'd hidden from her husband told a different story than the concerned daughter-in-law narrative she'd maintained. 3 weeks after Linda's inheritance became public, Jessica had contacted a law firm in Zurich, not to congratulate Linda or offer support, but to explore whether Michael, as Linda's only child, might have legal grounds to challenge the will. "Dear Mr. B. Hoffman," her initial email began, "I am writing regarding a substantial inheritance recently left to my mother-in-law by a family friend. Given the elderly woman's age and the surprising nature of the bequest, my family is concerned that she may have been unduly influenced." The attorney's response had been swift and discouraging. Swiss inheritance law strongly protects testamentary freedom. Unless you can prove fraud, duress, or mental incapacity at the time the will was written, your chances of successful challenge are minimal. But Jessica hadn't given up. She'd sent medical records she'd obtained without Linda's permission, claiming they showed signs of depression and potential cognitive decline. She'd hired a private investigator to research Linda's recent activities, looking for evidence of unusual behavior or suspicious associations. Most damning of all, she'd attempted to have Linda declared mentally incompetent in absentia, filing papers in Connecticut claiming that Linda's sudden departure to Switzerland and subsequent lifestyle changes indicated a break from reality. The legal strategy had failed spectacularly. Swiss authorities had interviewed Linda extensively and found her to be completely competent and well-informed about her circumstances. The Connecticut court had dismissed Jessica's petition as frivolous, and Linda's attorneys had threatened criminal charges for harassment and filing false documents. But there was one more secret, one that made Jessica's stomach churn with guilt and fear. Hidden in her desk drawer was a forged power of attorney document that she'd planned to use to gain control of Linda's American bank accounts. The plan had been to present it to Linda's former bank, claiming that Linda had signed it before leaving for Switzerland as a precautionary measure. Jessica had never used the document. Linda had closed those accounts before leaving, but its existence was evidence of criminal intent that could destroy her life if discovered. Her phone rang, startling her from her dark thoughts. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Jessica, honey, I just saw your Facebook post about Michael traveling. Is everything okay?" Jessica realized she hadn't posted anything about Michael's trip. Someone else must have seen him at the airport or heard about his plans. "It's complicated. Mom, is this about his mother's sudden wealth? The whole family's talking about it. Aunt Marie found those old society photos online. Did you know Linda used to be some kind of heiress?" "Yes, I knew." "Well, I hope you're being smart about this. If she's really as rich as people are saying, you need to make sure Michael stays on her good side. Family money can change everything." The irony was crushing. Even her own mother saw Linda's wealth as an opportunity to exploit rather than a reason to treat her with respect. "I have to go, Mom. Just remember what I taught you. Honey, rich people stay rich by being careful with their money. If you play this right, you could set your family up for generations." After hanging up, Jessica stared at the forged power of attorney document. Everything her mother had said was true. Linda's wealth could change everything. But Jessica had played it all wrong. Instead of building a relationship with Linda, she'd tried to manipulate and control her. Instead of earning a place in Linda's new life, she'd ensured her own exclusion from it. And now Michael was in Switzerland, probably learning the full extent of her deception. Soon he would know about the legal challenges, the attempted competency hearing, maybe even the forged documents. Jessica had one choice left. She could confess everything and hope for forgiveness, or she could wait for the truth to destroy her marriage from Switzerland. Either way, her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Michael's flight to Geneva gave him 9 hours to think about the conversation he needed to have with his mother. 9 hours to rehearse apologies that felt inadequate for decades of taking her for granted. 9 hours to wonder if he'd destroyed their relationship beyond repair. Hans met him at the airport with the same professional courtesy he'd shown Linda months earlier. But Michael could sense the man's protective wariness. Everyone at Villa Sterling had clearly formed strong opinions about the family that had mistreated their beloved new mistress. "Miss Whitmore is expecting you," Hans said as they drove through the Swiss countryside. "She asked me to tell you that you are welcome, but that things have changed." "I know they have. I hope they have. She is not the same woman who left America. Mr. Thompson, Switzerland has reminded her of who she truly is." When Villa Sterling came into view, Michael understood immediately why his mother had fallen in love with the place. The honey-colored stone glowed in the afternoon sun, and Lake Geneva stretched endlessly beyond manicured gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. Mrs. Mueller greeted him at the entrance with polite formality, but Michael could see the questions in her eyes. Was he here to cause more trouble for the woman they'd all grown to love and protect? "Your mother is in the library," Mrs. Mueller said, leading him through rooms that took his breath away. The villa wasn't just beautiful, it was elegant in a way that spoke of generations of refined taste and unlimited resources. Linda Catherine was sitting by tall windows that overlooked the lake, reading a leather-bound book. She looked up when he entered, and Michael felt his heart break a little at what he saw in her face. She looked magnificent. There was no other word for it. Her silver hair was styled elegantly. She wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than his monthly salary, and her posture radiated the confidence of someone completely comfortable in her surroundings. But more than that, she looked happy. Genuinely, deeply happy, in a way Michael realized he'd never seen before. "Hello, Michael," she said, closing her book and giving him a small smile. "How was your flight, Mom?" He stopped himself. "Catherine, I'm so sorry for everything." She studied his face carefully, and Michael felt like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "What are you sorry for?" "Specifically," she asked, "for letting Jessica treat you badly, for taking you for granted, for assuming you'd always be available no matter how little effort I put into our relationship, for calling the police on you when you were just trying to live your life, for questioning your competence when I should have been celebrating your happiness. What else?" Michael felt his throat tighten. "For never asking about your past, for never wondering why you were so careful with money or why you never talked about your family, for being so self-absorbed that I never realized what you'd sacrificed for Dad and me." Linda set down her book and really looked at her son. "And what do you understand now? I understand that you gave up everything for love, that you chose to raise me with values instead of money, that you lived quietly and humbly not because you had to, but because you chose to, and that instead of being grateful for that sacrifice, I let my wife humiliate you because it was easier than standing up to her. What about Jessica? Michael's face darkened. I know about the email to Victoria. I know she tried to manipulate an elderly woman into giving us money. And I know there are other things, legal things, that she's hidden from me. Are you going to ask me about those legal things? No, that's between you and your attorneys. I'm here to ask if you can forgive me, and if there's any chance we can have a real relationship. Not the obligatory one we had before, but something honest and equal. Linda was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the lake where swans glided peacefully across the water. Michael, she said finally, I forgave you the moment you got on the plane to come here. The question is whether you can forgive yourself and whether you're ready to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. I am, whatever it takes. Then welcome to my home, Catherine Whitmore said. And for the first time in years, when she hugged her son, it felt like coming home for both of them. Michael's week at Villa Sterling became a revelation for both mother and son. For the first time in decades, they talked, really talked about everything they'd never discussed before. Catherine shared stories about her childhood in the Whitmore mansion, about the weight of expectations and the freedom she'd found in choosing love over legacy. She showed him photographs of herself at 19, radiant in designer gowns at charity galas, and explained why she'd never looked back after walking away from it all. I don't regret giving it up, she said as they walked through the villa's gardens one evening. Your father and I had 30 beautiful years together. You were raised with love and values, not entitlement and obligation, but I do regret letting myself become so small after he died. Michael listened to his mother's stories with growing amazement and shame. Why didn't you ever tell me about the money you'd given up? Because I was afraid you'd feel guilty about the life you'd had. I was afraid you'd think less of your father for not being able to provide more. And honestly, because I was afraid you'd think I was foolish for choosing love over wealth. I think you were the bravest person I've ever known, Michael said quietly. And I think I inherited none of that courage. I chose the easy path with Jessica instead of standing up for what was right. Catherine stopped walking and turned to face her son. Michael, you're here now. That took courage. And you're willing to face the consequences of the choices you've made. That's more than many people ever do. And during his stay, Michael also got to know the people who had become Catherine's new family. Mrs. Muller shared stories of watching Catherine transform from a frightened, overwhelmed woman into someone who commanded respect and affection from everyone at the villa. Hans spoke of Catherine's kindness to the local villagers and her growing fluency in German and French. She fits here, Hans said as he drove Michael to visit the village where Catherine had become a minor celebrity for her photography. Like she was always meant to be here. But it was Pierre, the part-time chef who came to prepare special meals, who offered the most insight into Catherine's transformation. When she first arrived, she was like a bird with clipped wings, he said in his heavily accented English. She would apologize for everything, for asking questions, for taking up space, for existing. Now, she fills the room with her presence. She has remembered how to fly. And Michael spent afternoons learning to use Victoria's old cameras, taking pictures of the lake and mountains while Catherine shared her newfound passion for photography. They cooked together in the villa's professional kitchen, and Catherine taught him the French techniques she'd learned from Pierre. But mostly, they talked about Robert's death and how it had diminished Catherine, about Michael's marriage and the warning signs he'd ignored, about the future and what kind of relationship they wanted to build. I can't go back to the way things were, Catherine said on his last evening. I won't make myself small anymore to accommodate other people's comfort. That includes yours, Michael. I don't want you to. I want to know this version of you, the real you. I want to understand who my mother really is. then you'll need to be prepared for the fact that I'm not the same woman who lived in that tiny apartment. I have opinions now. I have boundaries. I have expectations for how I'm treated. Good, Michael said, and meant it. You should have had all of those things years ago. On his last morning, Catherine gave him a gift, one of her photographs. Professionally framed, it showed the sunrise over Lake Geneva, with the Alps reflected in the still water. But it wasn't just a beautiful landscape. It was a metaphor for new beginnings. For your new apartment, she said. Michael looked confused. New apartment. When you get home, you're going to need somewhere to live while you figure out what comes next. I've arranged for you to stay in a furnished place in Hartford for as long as you need. It's paid for. Mom. Catherine, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You're my son, and you came here to rebuild our relationship. That means something to me. But, Michael, this isn't charity. It's an investment in your future, and in us. As Hans drove him to the airport, Michael felt like he was leaving a different person than he'd arrived. The man who had come to Switzerland was still trying to manage his mother's life. The man who was leaving understood that Catherine Whitmore needed no management. She needed respect. Michael returned to Connecticut to find Jessica waiting with divorce papers already drawn up and a moving truck in their driveway. Her attorney was present, along with a real estate agent preparing to list their house for immediate sale. You made your choice in Switzerland, Jessica said without preamble. Now I'm making mine. Michael felt relief rather than sadness as he signed the papers. What will you do? I'm moving back to California. My sister has a business there. Jessica's voice was carefully controlled, but Michael could see the anger and desperation beneath the surface. And Michael, I want you to know that everything I did was for us. The email to Victoria, the legal challenges I was trying to secure our future. Legal challenges. Jessica's attorney stepped forward with a thick folder. As part of the divorce settlement, my client is required to disclose certain actions she took regarding your mother's inheritance. There were attempts to challenge the will, a petition for competency evaluation, and a forged power of attorney document. Jessica finished, her face flushing with shame. I never used it, but I had it prepared. Michael stared at his soon-to-be ex-wife with a mixture of horror and pity. You tried to have her declared mentally incompetent. She disappeared overnight and started posting pictures from a life she couldn't afford. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to trust her. You were supposed to be happy for her. You were supposed to treat her like family instead of like an obstacle to your financial security. As the movers loaded Jessica's belongings, Michael felt the weight of his marriage lifting from his shoulders. He'd spent years trying to please a woman who was never satisfied, who always needed more status, more money, more validation. He'd allowed her insecurities to poison his relationship with his mother and nearly cost him the chance to know Catherine as she truly was. The apartment Catherine had arranged for him was in a historic building overlooking a small park. It was furnished simply, but elegantly, and the view from the living room window reminded him of the serenity he'd found at Villa Sterling. That evening, he called Catherine to let her know he was settled. How do you feel? She asked. Free, he said honestly. Scared, but free. Good. Fear means you're growing. Comfort is the enemy of change. Catherine, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret not having grandchildren? I know Jessica and I talked about kids, but with everything that's happened, there was a pause. And when Catherine spoke, her voice was warm with understanding. Michael, you're 34 years old. Your life is just beginning. Don't make major decisions based on what you think I want or need. Make them based on what will make you happy and fulfilled. I want to find someone like you, he said. Someone brave enough to choose love over security. Someone who sees value in things that can't be bought. Then be someone worthy of that kind of person. Be the man your father was honest, kind, hard-working. Be the man I raised you to be. Over the following months, Michael and Catherine settled into a new rhythm. He visited Switzerland quarterly, and she occasionally flew to New England to see him. But more importantly, they talked regularly, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Michael started his own automotive consulting business, using skills he'd learned working with luxury car dealers to help classic car collectors maintain their investments. The work was satisfying, and he found himself drawn to clients who valued craftsmanship and authenticity over status symbols. Catherine, meanwhile, was thriving in her Swiss life. Her photography was gaining recognition in local galleries, and she'd started teaching workshops for other expatriates learning to navigate Swiss culture. She was dating a retired professor named Klaus, not her driver Hans, but a different Klaus entirely, who shared her love of literature and travel. "Are you happy?" Michael asked during one of their calls. "I'm complete," Catherine replied. "For the first time since your father died, I feel complete." 1 year after Jessica's ultimatum and Michael's journey to Switzerland, Catherine Whitmore hosted her first photography exhibition at a gallery in Geneva. The collection, titled Rediscovered Light, featured images from her year of transformation, sweeping landscapes of Lake Geneva and the Alps, intimate portraits of the people who had become her new family, and powerful self-portraits that documented her journey from Linda Thompson to Catherine Whitmore. Michael flew in for the opening, arriving to find the gallery packed with an eclectic mix of Swiss society, fellow expatriates, and art collectors. Catherine moved through the crowd with an ease and confidence that took his breath away. She was magnificent in a way that had nothing to do with her elegant black dress or the expensive jewelry Victoria had left her, and everything to do with the quiet authority of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "Your mother has become quite the sensation," said Klaus the professor, not the driver, as he and Michael stood before a particularly striking photograph of sunrise over the villa. "She's been invited to show her work in Zurich next month." Michael watched his mother accept congratulations from a Swiss banker and his wife, speaking fluent German with an accent that still carried traces of her American origins. A year ago, she'd been afraid to leave her tiny apartment. Now she was at home in international society. "She's remarkable," Michael said, and meant it completely. "She always was," Klaus replied. "She just needed to remember it." The centerpiece of the exhibition was a series titled Inheritance Photographs that told the story of transformation without words. The first image showed a pair of worn hands holding a chipped teacup, the lighting dim and constrained. The final image showed elegant hands lifting a crystal wine glass, surrounded by the warm light of the villa's salon. Between them, a dozen photographs chronicled the journey from confinement to freedom. "The most profound inheritance," Catherine had written in the exhibition notes, "is not money or property, but the courage to become who we were, always meant to be." After the gallery cleared, Michael and Catherine walked along Lake Geneva under a canopy of stars. The Swiss night was crisp and clear, and the lights from the surrounding villages reflected on the water like scattered jewels. "Do you ever think about coming back to America?" Michael asked. "To visit, yes. To live, no." Catherine's voice was certain. "This is my home now. These are my people. This is the life I was meant to live. I'm proud of you, you know, not just for the success or the money, but for having the courage to start over at 64. Catherine smiled, linking her arm through her son's. "You know what the best part is. I'm not done yet. Klaus and I are planning to spend the winter in Victoria's apartment in Monaco. I'm going to photograph the Mediterranean and maybe learn Italian." "What about the 2-year residency requirement?" "Fulfilled as of last month. The villa and all of Victoria's investments are officially mine. But more importantly, I've proven to myself that I can build a life worth living." They reached a small bench overlooking the lake and sat in comfortable silence. A year ago, Their relationship had been strained by decades of unspoken resentments and unmet expectations. Now they sat together as equals, two adults who had chosen to love and respect each other without conditions. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me what courage looks like, for proving that it's never too late to change, for being my mother without sacrificing yourself to do it." Catherine reached for his hand, and they sat together watching the moonlight dance on the water. Tomorrow, Michael would fly back to his new life in Connecticut, and Catherine would return to hers at Villa Sterling. But for tonight, they were simply a mother and son who had found their way back to each other. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. For Catherine Whitmore, every day now felt like a beginning, another chance to live magnificently, another opportunity to embrace the life she'd always deserved. She was finally completely free.